Hey everybody, welcome back to Just the Sip, Tongasmic Wine Exploration and Adventure with me, your hostess, Norma Normington, and with Clay Mauritson.
It's wonderful to be here.
Thanks, Clay. So we have a very exciting episode planned for you guys, so stick around and we'll be right back. Hi there, and welcome back to Just the Sip. I have Clay Mauritson with me, and we are talking about quality control and wine standards today. But before we dive into that, I want to talk to Clay a little bit about his background. You can look on their website and find out more about the family. They've owned this land for, over 150 years now.
Yeah, me and my siblings are 6th generation. My kids and nieces and nephew are 7th generation.
Wow, that's amazing. And originally you had a lot more land.
We did.
Yeah. Like significant.
Yeah, well, we lost the vast majority of our property to eminent domain in the 1960s, so about 100 years after the original homestead.
Right. That's.
Yeah.
We won't go down that.
We're going to keep it lighthearted.
Yeah,
We're going to keep it happy. Yeah. We have a joke in our family that my parents believed in the adage that the more kids you had, the cheaper the labor force.
Right. Growing up in that environment, I have a feeling at some point you were like, I've had enough of this. I'm not going to be in the business. But you are. So tell us that defining moment when you had the aha, I really do love the wine industry. I want to be a part of it. What prompted this?
I wish I could say it was a moment. It was really more an evolution. I, without a doubt, am the black sheep of the family. All 3 of my brothers working in the vineyards as indentured servants learned what they wanted to do the rest of their lives. I learned what I did not want to do the rest of my life and thought that I never wanted to see another grapevine again. There's a lot of ways you could sum it up, but I think in many ways, sometimes in life, we just don't know what we have till it's gone.
Right.
And in order to truly realize, what we have, you need perspective. Sure. And I needed to get away from not just Sonoma County, but also from my family to appreciate what it meant to be a 6th generation anything in this country, but also what an incredible place Sonoma County was to be born and raised. So I think that was the start of it, was getting away, experiencing life, experiencing something different. And
growing up,
growing up, a little bit of maturity helps.
Sure, yeah.
But if there was a moment, I would say I had come home from college for a summer, and it was my first summer off. I was an athlete in college, and you didn't have a lot of free time. And I got home, and the first thing my dad tried to do was put me to work in the vineyards.
Of course.
And I was damned if I was going to spend my first summer off of my life working for my dad.
Back in this vineyard.
So he made it very clear if I was going to live under his roof, I was going to have a job that summer. And God's honest truth, I thought to myself, what's the most spiteful thing I can do? I mentioned I was the black sheep, right?
Right.
And still have a roof over my head. And so, interesting as it may sound, probably the most spiteful thing I could have done was to go to work for a winery.
And why is that?
Because we were grape growers. We were farmers. We farmed a lot of different things, but grapes at that time were the primary source of income. Okay. And back in the 70s and 80s, it was a fairly contentious relationship. Growers wanted to get paid as much as they could for their fruit. Wineries wanted to pay as little as they had to get the fruit. So, like I said, it was contentious, antagonistic, whatever you want to call it. So here I just wanted to piss my dad off and go to work at a winery. So I take this summer job, it really made an internship out of it, and absolutely fell in love with it. Wow. It was not the evil empire that I had made it out to be in my mind. It was this unbelievable blend of science and artisan, creativity that I just fell in love with. And so, like I said, it wasn't really a moment. It was more this process of growing up, getting away, having appreciation, and now working in a side of the industry that was different from what my family did. That was really important to me, but also connected. That I was like, wow, I can fulfill some of these desires I have to be creative, to be entrepreneurial, and still be connected to my family business, but not working day in and day out with it. Okay. So, like I said, not a moment, more of a process that really led. It was the spark that fanned a flame that created a forest fire.
Wow. That's an evolution. And then, so you get all your grapes still from Mauritson vineyards?
I get about 80% of them. Okay. It changes from year to year. Sometimes certain vineyards have higher yields, lower yields, but the vast majority come from our family estate. Very important to note, it's 2 totally separate businesses.
Right.
We have the vineyard operation, we have the winery operation, and we like to say there are no family discounts. why, would my brothers, sell grapes to me for less than they can sell it to another great winery?
Sure.
Is the old adage that you don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul. And for us, we always look at our business from a generational standpoint. Mm-hmm. And we look at it as two strong businesses moving forward give the next generation a higher likelihood of continuing to do what we've done now for 6 generations.
Now, I got to mention for everybody, we're sitting in the library.
Yes. Yep.
Of the tasting room, and obviously it's gorgeous. I mean, just the backdrop behind us is perfect. So thank you for setting that up. But a lot of bottles in here. So tell us about the varietals that you have to choose from out of your own vineyard.
So my family, our vineyards are really, located in northern Sonoma County. So think Alexander Valley, Dry Creek Valley, and then we're probably best known for our Rockpile vineyard holdings. Great place to grow Cabernet supported varietals like, Cab Franc, Petit Verdot, Malbec, Merlot. It's a great place to grow Zinfandel, obviously. And then we grow the other supporting white varietals, meaning Sauvignon Blanc kind of goes hand in hand with Cabernet when you think about Bordeaux. And then some of our vineyard sites in Alexander Valley and Dry Creek are on, I say, bodies of water. They're either on the Russian River in Alexander Valley or on Dry Creek. And that unique soil composition with the unique cooling effect of those bodies of water makes it a good place to grow Chardonnay. So primary varietals that my family grows: on the white side, Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay; on the red side, Cabernet, Zinfandel, and then again the supporting varietals for that. What we do at the winery really follows that closely, as you might imagine. And I'm using what I think are the best vineyards that we're growing.
Of course. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly.
Why wouldn't you? But, and I tell my audience to try different varietals.
Yes.
But I'm coming back to, I'm kind of circling my own wagons here because I'm in the capital of where we're going to find some of the best grape varietals of what you just mentioned. So if you're thinking, Norma, you told us to try something different, bust our norms, break out of your box, blah, blah, blah. And here we are drinking Sauvignon Blanc. And, well, we're going to drink Zinfandel. So, spoiler alert. But those are sort of still some of the bigger varietals that people know.
Well, and the reason they know them is because it's what grows great here.
Right.
And if you're looking at Sonoma County as a whole, we are blessed to be in one of the greatest grape growing regions in the world. Not only do we have a perfect climate and perfect terroir, but it's the diversity of Sonoma County. So you've got Russian River Valley and Sonoma Coast, which grows some of the best Pinot Noir and Chardonnay in the world. You've got the inland valleys like Dry Creek Valley, Alexander Valley, Knights Valley that are warmer. So Cabernet, Zinfandel, Sauvignon Blanc flourish there. And I think that's what makes Sonoma County so special. So to your point, yes, experiment, but you start to understand why Cabernet is synonymous with Napa Valley, why Dry Creek Valley is synonymous with Zinfandel, because each area is really predicated to a specific varietal success.
Right. Known,
yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
absolutely.
we put a date and we put a place on every bottle of wine for a reason.
Yeah, right. What if it doesn't have a date or a place on it?
And
that's not many of the wineries here.
Exactly. I mean, look, if you're making sparkling wine, they always rely on multi-vintage blending. So that's a little different animal. I think if you're making a still wine that doesn't have a date and a place on it, you're probably making it for a broader audience.
Sure.
You're not as interested in expressing a specific terroir or a specific vintage, which is okay. You're more interested in recreating something year in and year out. And we would say that that's a commodity. That's Coca-Cola or that's a McDonald's cheeseburger. You could argue that there's a time and a place for those things, and every industry needs its gateway, right? And so for us, I would say that those wines are really more of the gateway wine to getting into understanding what varietal works best in what place and why vintage matters.
Right, and starting to learn the AVAs of the different regions, right? So, Clay, that's a good transition because I'm going to transition right to this beautiful Sauvignon Blanc. So
this is what we're drinking. Little 2021 Dry Creek Valley Sauvignon Blanc from Mauritson.
Cheers.
Cheers. Salute.
I already had a sip.
Yeah.
Sorry. I know, that's not good. Swirl a little. We went through the 5 S's, so don't forget to swirl it. Get that nice aroma in your glass. Stick your nose in there like we talked about. And take your sip, right? So tell us a little bit more so I can drink my wine.
So this is from 2 estate vineyards here in Dry Creek Valley. When we think of our portfolio of wines, the Mauritson wines are all appellation focused. So our goal is to give you a perfect representation of the vineyards and the date in the bottle. With the Mauritson wines, it's a blend of multiple vineyards. So 2 different vineyards in here. We take an incredibly simplistic approach to winemaking. And our belief is that wine's made in the vineyard. Our job is not to screw it up. And we want to do everything in our power to express that sight in the bottle from the standpoint that we don't inoculate. So we use native yeast. If we're going to go through malolactic, we use native malolactic. We try to limit the decision-making process. The only real unique thing about this Sauvignon Blanc is that we fermented in upright oak tanks.
Okay.
So don't think of it as a 60-gallon barrel. Think of it as a 2,000-gallon tank. And we just love the thermal properties and the oxidative properties that oak provides, but we don't want the surface ratio that you get out of a smaller vessel, and we don't want the influence from a new oak vessel.
Right.
So
I'm not tasting much oak here.
you don't taste any oak. You just taste a softness that comes from the oxidation.
Yeah.
You have a cleanness that comes from healthy fermentations because, again, we're not inoculating, so we're relying on native yeast, which can be a little bit more finicky. And so the thermal properties that oak provide a more favorable fermentation environment sometimes than stainless steel. So I love the texture that this wine has. It has such a richness on the entry, but it's not a richness associated with oak or malolactic. It's just a natural richness, and yet it's got varietal character. I don't care where in the world you're drinking Sauvignon Blanc from, it needs to taste like Sauvignon Blanc. And so again, when you're not meddling in it, when you don't, have all these decisions that are being made, you have a very pure expression of the vineyard.
Yeah. You keep saying a word, and I would like you to explain what it is, because I'm not really sure. You say it's not inoculate. It's what is it?
Inoculate.
Inoculate. I'm thinking about getting like a
inoculate. Exactly.
Right. Okay. So
what inoculation means?
This,
what most wineries. Let me rephrase that. What a lot of wineries do is when they want the fermentation to start, they add yeast to the fermentation. Okay. So that's all inoculation is.
Artificially beginning the process? Is that why would
I would say you're using a freeze-dried cultured yeast that has been grown in a lab somewhere. And all it is it's a replica of a yeast that someone isolated that did a good job fermenting, and so now they propagate it in a lab. Nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
We want to, again, express the purest sense of the vineyard site, so we're going to utilize the native flora and fauna that come in from that vineyard. And obviously, once you establish, a native yeast strain in your winery, that kind of tends to be the dominant strain. And not to get too deep in the woods, but that's what we love about the complexity and yet simplicity of winemaking, right? Is we're not doing anything to it, yet it becomes this very complex process where the native yeast and sometimes native bacteria that come in on the grapes from the vineyard will start that fermentation process, and then our native culture that is built up in the winery organically will finish the process. Sure. And having those multiple organisms active create complexity, create depth that you just can't recreate through a single organism doing all that work. It also limits our use of sulfur because we want to use the native flora and fauna. And so if we're adding sulfur at all, it's in minimal amounts. And just, again, it doesn't make someone else's doing it different, right or wrong. It's just our philosophy and how we want to make wine.
Perfect. Well, I love how you talked about the dichotomy of simplicity yet complexity in this same sentence, because let's go to quality standards. And that's a very vague term, right? But how do you make sure that your wines are meeting your quality standards, whatever you set here at the winery? And in my mind, I'm like, well, how do you get the wines tasting the same from year to year? But then perhaps you don't want to, because they're going to change from year to year depending on the environmentals and everything else. But let's go back to that quality piece. Like, how do you maintain that quality here?
Yeah,
what is your quality? Right?
So it starts with a philosophy, and this is going to sound off topic, but I promise I'll bring it back.
Okay.
It starts with a philosophy that every single relationship is based on trust. Mm-hmm. So we have trust amongst our, coworkers, and more importantly, we have trust with our consumers. And so our consumers trust that every wine that we put in the bottle is going to have a certain quality standard.
Sure.
So that's what it always comes back to. And you hit the nail on the head. It's not supposed to taste the same from year to year,
right.
But there's an expectation that our wines are going to have a certain level of TLC that goes into them. So well, what does that mean? People expect Rockpile to be a more tannic site. So yes, Rockpile Zins are generally going to be more tannic than Dry Creek Valley Zins. They expect that we are going to do things in a non-interventionist fashion. We're not adding, things at the hopper. We're not adding yeast. We're not adding chemicals. We're not doing that. That is just our internal philosophy that our customers have come to adapt. And there's an expectation there. If you're talking about just strict quality controls in the winery, when you make wine the way we do, it's actually much more onerous. It's a lot easier to throw 50 parts per million of sulfur into every single lot of grapes that comes into the winery, because that kills everything that comes in on it. And then when we decide the timing's right, then you add billions upon billions of cells of yeast that we're propagating in a lab to do something very specific. That's easy. That's very formulaic. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's not the way we choose to make wine. And when you make wine in a much more natural fashion, and I hate that word, but it's just a non-interventionist fashion, it requires a lot more quality control.
And a lot more work.
A lot more work, a lot more quality control in the lab, where we're having to analyze different things that, maybe other wineries wouldn't. There's a lot more risk involved, but risk always has to do with reward. And we feel that the reward in making the wines the way that we do is certainly worth the risk.
I appreciate you saying that, because I always feel like winemaking is an art and a science. Mm-hmm. And at what stages do you take that science and go into the lab?
Every stage.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah. So Emma, our winemaker, likes to describe her approach to winemaking as collecting as much objective data as possible to make inherently subjective decisions. So we started in the vineyard, and without even getting into viticulture techniques, let's just talk about what we do. So we start collecting data as early as bunch closure. And so we're looking at bunch weights, we're looking at berry diameters to help us project what our finished yield is. And then once we start looking at actual pre-harvest data, so what our Brix, pH, TAs are, and how those are progressing relative to the other data we're collecting, berry size, bunch weight, it helps us to understand what the ripening curve is going to look like. We take all that data and we weigh it against what are we seeing, what are we tasting. Mm-hmm. So in that instance, you have the hard data, which is the science, but you have, the very touchy-feely aspect of, the science is telling us one thing, but when I walk out into the vineyard, the vines are telling me that they're tired. The vines are telling me that they have plenty of vitality. What do I see on the Weather Channel? Do we see rain in the forecast? Do we see 100-degree weather in the forecast? And how does that correlate to what the vineyard is telling us? Because you have to take all this information, again, collecting it to make decisions that there's no second chances in wine. I think it's a big misunderstanding. People want to compare wine to other alcoholic products. And wine is so unique because it's not a commodity. It's not, hops and barley and wheat, rye, things that you can access 365 days a year to make bourbon or vodka or beer out of. Sure. We have one chance, one harvest to make it perfect.
Yeah. And thank you. Tell me about your harvest that didn't make the cut.
So 2020, thankfully it's somewhat in the rearview mirror, but we're still feeling the effects of it. Sonoma County and Napa was devastated by fires in 2020. So I say this first and foremost that we were not affected, but we didn't lose any property. We didn't lose our home.
Thankfully.
And so many people did.
Right.
But we were affected by smoke. And so grapes' skins are very absorptive during that period, and they absorb compounds out of the air. And smoke has a lot of volatile compounds that we now know are different glycol compounds. And so we lost our entire Rockpile crop in 2020. And while it was, on one hand, an extremely difficult decision because we knew what the financial ramifications would be, if you come back to that notion of trust, our customers are trusting that we're only going to put something in the bottle that is truly representative of that vineyard and that vintage. And while some people might argue that, hey, we had a fire in 2020, that was part of the vintage, I would say no, that wasn't part of it. So we took an objective approach again, If grapes tested positive for smoke taint, we didn't use them. Just very simple.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how do you dispose? You just didn't use them.
You just don't use them. So,
Early in the process, you made that decision.
Early in the process, you make that decision. You're dealing with organic material, right? There's absolutely no long-term effects of any of the smoke taint, or people ask about ash frequently. Absolutely not. I mean, ash is sequestered carbon.
That's ash is great fertilizer.
Great fertilizer, great for the soil. So in our case, we chose not to use that fruit. We chose not to pick those vineyards. And so all of the fruit, you still want to harvest the fruit, which kind of is adding salt to a wound, because here you can't use it, but you have to go through the labor to pick it. And the reason is because that's kind of a biologic response to the vines, that I've done my job. The fruit is off the vine. Now I can go to sleep.
Yeah.
And so we pruned all that fruit onto the ground. It just goes back into the soil as organic material that will aid in future vintages.
Feed birds.
Feed birds. feed a lot of things. Yeah.
Want to go on the Rockpile?
Yeah, let's do that.
Should I chug this? Wait.
You can do that. You can chug it.
Great. Yeah. Hold on while we all chug this. Oh, wait. He's going to dump.
I got a dump bucket. I have a long day.
I don't. I have a driver. Thank you, Jerry. So we're going to try the Zinfandel.
We are.
And the first thing I notice about this clay are the labels.
View for everyone out there.
Totally different than the Mauritson label.
They are.
So explain the branding behind that, because it has its own specific AVA, its own properties. You want to highlight the Rockpile. I'm guessing.
Yes, absolutely. Rockpile is a part of our soul. I mean, we have owned and farmed that piece of property contiguously since 1868. I mean, that in itself is really special. You think about 7 generations of our family to touch that property. So we really wanted to put Rockpile on a pedestal.
Okay.
Our commitment is that we only make, and just to kind of give you a view of the two labels side by side, again,
thank you.
Mauritson being our family name, the label on the right. These are all, blends of multiple vineyards within an AVA. Rockpile, we only make single vineyard wines from Rockpile. So that's the difference.
Wow.
Instead of calling it a reserve label, we simply look at it as a different expression of place. And in Mauritson, you're going to have a broader expression. Dry Creek Valley Sauvignon Blanc, Dry Creek Valley Zinfandel, Sonoma Coast Chardonnay. But in Rockpile, we're only making single vineyard wines from properties that have been a part of our family for generations. Okay. So that was the distinction. And I often challenge people to think about this, right? I said many times earlier that wine is the antithesis of a commodity. Well, think about how many things that we consume on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. How many things that we put in our body do we know exactly when it was produced, exactly where it came from, and consist of a single ingredient? And that's how unique wine is. And not every wine follows those 3 protocols, but many do. And that's our goal with the wines that we make, is to give you the absolute purest expression of those 3 things.
Wonderful. All right, let's stop talking.
Yeah. So I love that you went through the S's already, so I don't have to explain it.
You're welcome. That was episode 2.
So Rockpile's is such a different expression of Zinfandel. And as hard as I try to stay away from superlatives like best or better, I think we understand that most things in life are subjective. It is without a doubt one of the most unique Zinfandels you will ever try. Zinfandel as a varietal is it's a bastard. There's no other way to say it. I mean, it's such a problem child. It's big berried, it's thin skinned, it overripens, it overproduces. There's so many challenges with it. So when you find a Zinfandel that not only is varietally correct, but has balance and has structure, that is such a unique expression of the varietal. And that's what Rockpile ultimately gives us the ability to do. You're dealing with an extremely high elevation site, a site with no fog, i.e. no moisture. So we see smaller berries, looser bunches, hardly ever have any issues with botrytis. You have such an increased tannin profile because of the berry size, and we get unbelievable homogenization of ripening. So you don't get that overripe, jammy characteristic. You actually get the beautiful berry fruit people love, but you also get mineral, you get herb, you get so much complexity out of it.
Yeah. You said precisis, so whatever you said, right? So it ended in SIS, so I'm thinking some sort of,
Which word?
It sounded like some sort of like bacterium or virus.
Oh, I was talking about prone to rot, to botrytis.
Botrytis, that's
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
What's that?
Botrytis is sometimes referred to as noble rot. If you're drinking Sauterne, all Sauternes are infected with botrytis, which dehydrates and rots the grapes. Works really well in Sauvignon Blanc in that super rare instance.
Okay.
In other varietals, it's absolutely devastating. So it is just simply, a rot or a mildew that affects the grapes and makes them smell like rot and mildew, that dehydrates them. And the reason that Zinfandel is more susceptible to it is simply that it has larger berries.
Okay.
So the larger, if you have loose berries that kind of sit here individually, the larger a berry gets, the tighter the bunches become. And so when you have tight bunches, should you get any moisture inside that bunch, there's really no way for that moisture to get out. And so in instances of fog or rain, Zinfandel is much more prone to rot than other varietals.
Gotcha. And how do you prevent that? Or can you?
Do
you want to?
Grow it in the right, absolutely. You do not want it.
Okay.
Trust me.
Unless it's
Even in California, like it's so rare to get botrytized Sauvignon Blanc. You have to have like these really perfect environments, which is why really they only make Sauterne. Well, Sauterne is a region. They only make botrytized Sauvignon Blancs really in the Sauterne region of France. How do you do it? First of all, grow the right varietals in the right place.
Okay.
So Zinfandel, in my humble opinion, needs to be grown in well-drained soils. So you promote a smaller berry size. You typically want to grow Zinfandel on areas that have great sun exposure and great wind exposure. So again, helps dry the fruit out. In our case, we farm it a little bit differently as well, and that's really all credit to my brother. So we utilize some different pruning techniques with Zin to help promote, less stacking of the bunches, help promote more uniform ripening.
Wow. Okay, so you're talking about nature and nurture.
Yes.
Awesome. So how do people get your wines, Clay? I mean, because we can take another look at the bottle, but the last time you showed me the label and it didn't have a UPC, it was like mind blowing, because almost every single bottle that you buy, especially off the shelf, is going to have a UPC label on it. And theirs doesn't. So explain to me why you don't, and then how people can get it, right?
So, there's absolutely nothing wrong with box stores, grocery stores. So I don't want this to come off negative. We just don't make very much wine.
Right.
And so
small batch, would you say?
I would say the terms that we use, are boutique. Or,
That's wine industry term?
Yeah, wine industry term for a very small brand. And everything's relative, right? Our production's around 10,000 cases. So of course there's wineries that are smaller than us, but the vast majority of the wines that you see out in the world are exponentially larger than us. So why don't we put UPC codes on it? It just helps us control where our wines end up. We want our wines primarily to be in restaurants.
Okay.
Because typically in the restaurants that our wines are in, you have a sommelier. And we want the sommelier telling our unique story. Okay. Really, it's spreading that word of mouth marketing. And same thing, we don't mind our wines being in retail, but we want them to be in a fine wine shop where you have a wine steward out there helping to tell the story of what makes our wine unique. If you have UPC codes on your bottles, then there's a high likelihood that your wines are going to end up in a Safeway or a Publix, depending on where you live in the country, or a Total Wine. Again, there's nothing wrong with that other than the fact that we make such limited amounts of wine. We want to make sure that it's going to places that really, focus more on the story, not just what's in the bottle.
Right. Appreciate it more than anything else. Yeah. Right. So thank you, and tell people how to get it.
So, our wines are, we make 23 different wines on a normal year. We do distribute 5 to 6 of those wines depending on the market. Okay. So, whether you're on either one of the coasts or a major city in between, you can look at your favorite restaurants for our wines. But the other 17 to 18 wines are really only available through our tasting room, wine club, or mailing list. Okay. And we just make such limited amounts of them. There's just not a lot to spread out to the world. And so you can go to our website, which is mauritson.wines.com, and you can join the wine list. You can join the, wine club, mailing list, or just come see us at the winery. We'd love to host you.
And They're giving a special deal. So I have to backtrack a little bit because I meant to say this in the introduction and it blew my mind. I mean, ouch. So I know Clay virtually from like the past 4 years, and Clay convinced his team to support Movember Foundation. And I've been doing wine tasting charities, and Clay has generously donated a lot of his proceeds and his time to do virtual tastings. And again, we're going to have that this November for the Movember charity, and we'll get into that later, but that's how our background on that. And thank you for your philanthropy.
It's our pleasure. Thank you for being a leader in the space.
Thank you. But the good news is, for anyone who mentions just the sip, will get the money that is spent for that is proceeds are going to go towards Movember.
Yeah, just like we do with our Movember tasting, we will donate 15% of the proceeds of any sales that people mention just the sip will go to Movember.
That's perfect. And it doesn't have to be in November.
No.
Whenever I get my rear and gear and get this out and post it for everybody, that's when the clock starts.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And what about after November?
We're going to talk to my boss about that.
I think you should.
Let her decide when the cutoff is. But again, we're so appreciative of what you're doing to raise awareness and keep people active, especially our military, and just means the world to us. So we're happy to support it.
Thank you. And I tell you guys, do not be ASSs, and I just stepped right into that trap. So don't be ASSs, be anti-snobs is what I tell them. Right? Be ASs. So sorry for throwing a landmine.
That's all right.
So kind of parting ideas here for people that are just starting into wine and finding an appreciation, and they're like, I think I like wine. I want to learn more. What's some advice for you that you could give to these people?
We live in the age of information. You have access to so much information. I would say find a critic, find a wine reviewer, find a wine shop or a wine steward in a wine shop that you identify with, that you trust their opinion, you trust their palate, and they get to taste hundreds, if not thousands, of wines a year. Talk to them about what you like. Try to articulate it as best as you can, and then take some of their input to guide you in a direction. And then once you find something that you like, then try to understand why you like it. Is it the varietal you like? Is it the region you like? Is it the producer that you like? Because once you get that kind of focus, you're going to have a much greater understanding and likelihood of continuing to pick wines that are going to, be enjoyable for you. And I mean, there's such a huge divergence of style of wines. There's never any right or wrong. It's just different.
So subjective. That's what I tell people. Yeah. I mean, you and I could love these wines, and they could be like, yeah, not mine. Yeah. Not for me. But I really love the Sauv Blanc, right? So yeah, that's great advice. Thank you on that. What did I forget? Any final thoughts you have other than thank you, and we'll get to that.
The world is your oyster. I'm here to answer questions.
Well, your time is everybody's time is valuable, but I know you're a busy man, and I sincerely appreciate your time today and helping educate our viewers on Just the Sip, learning so much through wine education and being ASs. And cheers to you, Clay. Thank you so much.
Great to have you here. Thank you for featuring us.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Just the Sip. We'll see you again next month. Cheers.
Cheers.